Hey everyone, I'm Gabe Caldwell, one of the co-founders here at Quinn, and today we're sitting down in a customer interview here with Dan Westfall. Dan Westfall is the founder of Client Focused Financial, a solo advisory practice with offices in Florida and Pennsylvania. And he's been with Quinn since really the early days, Dan. We were trying to figure out the red tail integration and really building out the right features. And you've been a tremendous voice in kind of how we've been shaping the product. I've used a lot of the workflows and different features of Quinn, and I know we're playing with PDF document automation. Actually, hopefully, continue the conversation after this to help set up some of those
Okay.
things there. But would love to just dig into, learn a bit more about client focused, how you got started in the advisory business here to kick things off for the audience.
Yeah, appreciate you guys doing this with me. And kind of using my insights, I guess, a little bit. I started in the investment advisory world in 2012. I started Client Focused Financial in 2017 in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and then moved down to Florida, like so many other people in 2020, moved to St. Petersburg, Florida. I connected with Gabe, through actually another venture that they had done at the time. When they started with Quinn, really just, we were talking about, it's like, well, how to make, life more productive as an investment advisor. And Quinn has been, a really great tool and, kind of helping with that process.
That's awesome. Yeah, and to kind of shape it for the audience there too, tell us a bit about kind of the amount of clients that you're managing today,
Yeah,
and any resources and help that you have here. And I know one of the part of your story is you were looking to hire before we started talking about Quinn,
sure.
thinking about an
Yeah.
assistant, and then kind of found Quinn to fill that spot for you.
Yeah, so I have about 270 households, manage them as a solo advisor, manage about 75 million in AUM. Um, yeah, when we first started talking about Quinn, I was hitting that point where I was like, I feel like I need a, administrative assistant just to kind of help out with daily tasks, workflows like that, 10 to 15 hours a week that it felt like I was spending doing stuff that isn't really, the things that really make the firm grow and move and are important for clients, but the things that need to get done that typically an administrative assistant would be doing. Um, I think just around that time is when you guys started the process of Quinn and, getting, evolving Quinn of, getting it to be the AI system that it is today. It's definitely been helpful with pushing that off of where, I don't need to hire an administrative assistant. And if anything, actually right now I'm looking to hire other advisors that, can kind of maybe take some of the, um, workflow or, smaller clients off of my plate ultimately and, help with growing the top end of the business, but utilizing Quinn as a recruiting tool where, a lot of other firms, don't have the access of things like Quinn. So that's been something in interviews that I've been, talking to, other advisors about that are kind of in that process of shopping firms and things. So
Yeah, love that. One thing you shared with me before, and you've got a lot of influence with other folks in our network, just focusing on revenue generating activities versus kind of the
yeah.
minutia and the admin behind the scenes. Be curious to dig in kind of pre-Quinn when you're managing a lot of households, have a nice practice and growing. What's your day to day look like around kind of how you're spending your time, admin work or revenue generating activities? How did that look, and then how did it change once you were starting to use Quinn?
Yeah. Every day is, probably like a lot of advisors just getting into the CRM, looking at the daily tasks of things that you have to do, prioritizing certain things of, withdrawals for clients and, new money coming in that needs to be traded and invested. But then getting into like, the ongoing either research with investment management, and then eventually the, client, relationship side of things of running, client meetings and, the stuff that really was what really makes money of within a business where, the more time that I can spend as an advisor with either my current clients working on their portfolios or prospecting new clients, the more money that, I'm going to make my clients, the more where I'm going to make as a firm and growing revenue. So, doing all the other like that 10, 12 hours a week of admin work was really the part that, I was looking at hiring an admin where it's like, spending 50,000 a year on an admin for really a role where it's like, it takes me 10 hours. It would probably take them 25, 30, and then they'd be sitting around for the other 15. So each week. And it's like, that's not really what I wanted, but like, that's just the model that, before I started my firm and it worked at other firms, like that's the model that most firms have. So in that old school kind of like traditional business model of, you're the main advisor, you have the administrative assistant to do all of the admin type stuff. And as Gabe and I talked about it, I'm like, it'd be great for technology to be able to replace that because I had already used DocuSign within my practice for a number of years. Originally starting, way back like 2011, 2012 timeframe, where it was just doing paper applications all the time, which I can remember like the big filing cabinets and stuff that we had at the offices, which was crazy to like think about with all the, printed out papers that you'd be mailing people and then waiting 2 weeks to get it back just to get an account opened and start a transfer versus what DocuSign is now um, for the industry as a whole. But the financial services industry is just always so slow to adapt technology and get ahead of the curve. So, yeah, anyway, really, I was looking to kind of like improve processes and systems, and basically save on that wasted time of administrative sort of activities. So then I could refocus those hours each week on putting that back towards prospecting new clients, spending time with doing, current client activities, whether that be just investment reviews or even just spending more time doing research just as I do the portfolio management, spending more time on that side. So, that definitely helped me out over the last, I guess it's been like a year and a half or so with Quinn, something like that.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So,
It's been that long. Yeah, and I love that.
yeah,
What industries are prime right now for using amazing technology to do something that's never been done before. And so those early adopters of new
mhm.
technology that has been vetted, that's accurate, can give you a tremendous advantage there of saving time, which time equals more money if you use it appropriately. I know one of the workflows that you use with Quinn is kind of Quinn's ability to take care of post-meeting kind of workflow administrative tasks. Before we jump into kind of the value of that, I'm curious, what was your process before Quinn around kind of handling, running the meeting, and then what would you do after that meeting? Kind of frame that around like how much time that took and
Yeah.
pain and
I think actually it was one of our conversations that made me realize I was like, yeah, I probably like so, prior to Quinn, what I was doing was, I'd have the meeting, I have the notes in my CRM that I'm taking as I'm on the call. If I'm doing like a phone call with somebody as like an initial conversation to get that information, or the Zoom or whatever it is, I'm, on one screen over here looking at the screen typing and on the other screen looking at the camera, having to continue that conversation with the person. So um, Quinn with the note taking ability now, they can, it's taking the notes so I can be focused on the meeting. But then post meeting, one of the things that, I know Gabe and I were talking about, he's like, yeah, so what do you do post meeting to like follow up with the clients and kind of recap? And I was like, nothing, we just, I leave the agenda where I was like, so the next call we'll do this. And I wasn't sending out like a recap email. I'm like, yeah, it's probably something I should be doing. I just don't because it's just that extra 5, 10 minutes of time where, I'm definitely more of a direct style, like personality style where I'm like, let's just get stuff done and move on to the next thing. I'm not like like the fluff sort of like things that are, um, probably like things like that I should be doing, which now I have Quinn doing that because Quinn's taking the notes. It then generates and drafts a follow up email, which is way better, honestly, than I would have ever come up with or created it. So it's kind of two birds with one stone, where it's basically like I have like almost think of it in a way as like a live assistant sitting there, while I'm doing the meeting that's taking the notes and then they're summarizing and drafting up this beautiful email to the client, incorporating, all of the main bullet things that need to get done, next steps, etc. But then also adding in the little fluff things like just had a meeting this morning with a client review where it drafted the follow-up email and it put in there, have fun on your Alaska cruise coming up in June. I was like, what a nice little, like, we talked about that in the call, but that's not something that I would have consciously been thinking about drafting the email, because that's just not, it's not my personality style. And I think that that's just, that little touch stuff. I'm sure, when a client gets that, it gives them the warm fuzzies, just like, sending out like a Christmas or holiday card, or, like you send out birthday cards, like stuff like that. It's those little touch points that, like, as an advisor, it's like, how can I create a warmer, better feeling for each one of my clients? But at the same time, like, being time sensitive and, focusing on really the important stuff. Like, it's that trade off, but it's, if technology can do it, it's just makes my life way better. So definitely been a improvement in the process there for sure.
That's great. I mean, as far as the post-meeting workflow automation, sounds like this has really saved you some time. And those soft touches you were talking about, Dan, there, incorporating kids, grandkids, upcoming trips like that Alaska trip there. Tough to quantify that as far as did that generate more AUM
Yeah.
or referrals, but I think over time, would you agree that develops that rapport, opens them up to kind of sharing more, which then leads into more business?
Yeah, because ultimately, like, what I'm trying to do is, just build more trust with these people, because it's their life savings that I'm managing, and it's, while I have them as a client, ultimately the more that they trust me, the more comfortable they feel with me, and the better that relationship is, the more referrals they're going to end up giving me too. So, all those little things like add up over time. So if something like technology can do that, where it's just making me look better, that just that's a pretty good thing.
Yeah, that's great. On that workflow, and we'll get into some other ones, but you were there early days testing out the initial integration to Redtail, which you use as your CRM.
Mhm.
How much of a time savings has it been when Quinn's able to take take the notes, take the data, update information in Redtail for you? Maybe talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, from a time saving standpoint, it's, definitely the notes are super detailed, so it's just very, user friendly in that way, where I can just focus solely on that, like, direct Zoom conversation I'm having. I've actually started using it more in one-on-one meetings, where I'm recording basically the conversation, and then it's uploading that right into the client's file as well, which has been a nice time saver. So then again, it's just, especially when you're literally right in front of them, like if you're sitting there taking notes on a computer or writing notes down, like, obviously they know you're writing notes, but you're slightly distracted, and there's that little, like, unspoken break in communication there, versus when you can literally just free flow and have a conversation. So, like, that's way more valuable, I think, um than anything, because, like, if you're able to, like, sit there and just truly go back and forth with them over a 45-minute, hour long in-person conversation, and the whole time Quinn's listening and taking notes for both your side and for the other side, and then breaking it down in pretty good detail as far as, like, the important stuff that's needed. Like, it's been, that's actually been one of the more impressive things that I think that Quinn's been doing for me, where um that wasn't something I even would have thought of, I guess, initially with Quinn. So,
Yeah,
but yeah,
that's
definitely a cool tool.
yeah. I mean, rapport, if you put that computer in between or you're not making eye contact, you're losing that connection. So being able to trust something to do the admin work for you, so you can keep that connection there, is just going to help build trust. So love hearing that. the and then ultimately getting that data, not forgetting it, right? And then putting it into your data source, being Redtail. So down the road, whether you're drafting emails, prepping for that next meeting, you've got the data for Quinn to reference. And speaking of that, some of the other workflows that you're using, prepping for meeting, talk about maybe that daily brief, how that's been valuable for you, and then
Yeah.
how maybe that's helped you here for future meetings when you're pulling that
Yeah.
data.
The daily brief is really actually a cool tool because it pulls up what who's on the calendar, what we're talking about, pulls up like the backgrounds of like them, so that way it's a refresher if they're like a prospective client. I don't really know them super well. It'll literally pull up everything we talked about before of like where they live, what they do for work, like all of those detailed things that are important, but not necessarily like top of mind for me. Puts that in there at like 7 a.m. in the morning. So that way when I go start my day, I go through and look at that. And that's, one of those first emails I'm looking at to be like, all right, what's on the agenda today, basically. So, um, it's definitely a cool tool to kind of like look at and set the day of what's coming up and really like get my mindset right around like who am I talking to today, and what are we going to be talking about ultimately. So, and Quinn does a great job with like putting those detail oriented things that typically I'm not, if I'm sitting in a meeting and even if I'm taking notes, like I'm not taking certain notes on things because it's just, it's not like what's in their IRA account or whatever. Quinn has done a really good job. I just thinking on a meeting that I had yesterday with a prospective client, they talked about what was in their portfolio, the allocation breakdown, even some specific funds. And then after the meeting, I look in Redtail and like as part of the notes, it has in the breakdown the allocation that they had, the funds that they would had spelled off and what was in it. And I'm like, what a great little tool this is. Cause like that's not stuff in the midst of a conversation that I want to be like, hey, pause. What's the ticker symbol for that? Like that's not it just that just breaks rapport. So it's just the fact that it's doing that in the background while we're just having this free flowing conversation is um, just a really cool tool. So yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And we're always surprised by just different advisors, what's important to them in that daily brief, because Quinn has access real time to all the info with the tools you have connected to it, as well as the internet, all the information on the web.
Mm,
So, give me the weather here locally, give me an update on the market for today, give me how's Bitcoin doing today, what's the latest, what are the top three trending news articles on sports. Those things can all be added to your daily brief to customize what you want to ultimately kind of read in the morning there, which can be pretty powerful. Um, the other the other workflow I know you're using is using Quinn to draft replies to emails that hit your inbox with context. Curious to see how that's going
mhm.
for you.
Yeah, that's a great. I mean, that's one of the things I was going to bring up because that's been such a time saver because we all get a ton of emails throughout the day, and the ones that are important from a client or prospective client, you want to put some time and effort into making replying to that in the best way that you can. And like, I've had situations where, a client reaches out and they're like, hey, I need to get access into my Schwab account. I have access to your client portal, but like I need to get into Schwab to, sign something or whatever it is. And, they're like, how do I do that? And there's been literally like the most or like detail step by step like breakdown that it just drafts and links to it, step by step instructions of what to click next, because the thing is it's looking back at previous emails where I've already answered this, and then it's actually then going out and expanding on it and doing it in like a way better way that I would have. So that's just kind of like one example of it. So um just it saves time ultimately, and even if it's not like 100% every time with the reply because it's a very specific thing, a lot of times it'll just give at least something in there, and I'll just delete out maybe a couple lines, put something else in there, and just help speed up, like instead of literally going from all right, I just read this email. What do I want to respond to this? It's already got it in there, at least in some way, and you might just need to take something out and add something in. So it's, again, just an additional time saver because, more time, if I can save even, you know, 15, 20 minutes a day in my inbox, compounded over the week, all of a sudden I've saved a few hours of time with emails. So, stuff like that. It's just, um, again, it's like, how do you make your business more efficiently? And Quinn as a tool like that has for me been a really great way to make my business more efficient. So that way I'm just not wasting that kind of time. It's also been from like a recruiting standpoint, a point that I've talked about with other advisors working in other firms because they don't have tools like this. And, it's like, how do you make, if I'm hiring somebody and trying to separate myself from other firms out there that, might be paying similar, splits or whatever from, an environment or an investment management, whatever, like the technology part is definitely an important thing. So I found in just some of the conversations that I've had that's something that's like, oh, like that's a time saver. That would be nice to not have to do that. So, um, I think that that's a way for those firms out there too that are trying to grow and expand. Like that's a great way to, grow and expand and recruit other people from other firms that are just slow at the upgrades of tech because, our industry is full of firms that just don't want to evolve and are complacent. So I think this is a great way to just be ahead of the curve as far as what other advisors and advisory firms are doing out there.
Yeah, love that. You've got the RIA, so you can make your own decision. And do you feel like you have maybe a competitive advantage to someone that's sitting underneath the
Um,
oversight of a broker dealer that's only allowing them to use
I,
so many tools?
yeah, I'm in an advisor synergy group with a lot of in the group. There's a lot of LPL advisors, and they have a note taker too, which I forget what it's called, Jump or something like that. But it all it does is it takes notes when they're in Zoom calls. So which that's only like one feature of what Quinn does. It's not doing an in-person note taking. It's not in their emails, drafting follow up emails. It's not putting tasks in their CRM based on the conversations. Like, when I talk to them about, they're like, oh, well, we can't because, it's an LPL thing or whatever. It's like, that sucks, sounds like you need to start your own RIA, I guess. So, or just come to a better place. So we got a better home for you. So, but yeah, like things like that, like hearing that, like, I started in the broker dealer world for the first like 5, 6 years of my career. And like I remember how it was with everything is slow there. Like compliance is slow, your technology improvements are slow. Like, I remember how difficult it was just to like do DocuSign stuff in like the early days where it was like a big thing to add like DocuSign. I was like, this is crazy that this is like an obstacle. Like it's DocuSign has been around for a while. And I remember in the beginning of my career, it's like, well, it's just easier to do the paper. I'm like, that makes no sense. So, but that's just the industry. You have people that are stuck in their ways, managing from the top. And there's just better opportunity for somebody that's running an RAA that can implement really, cutting edge technology. Because I know, Gabe, we've gone back and forth with this, just with improvements and stuff like that. I know after the call we're going to talk more about some other things that Quinn's working on that you guys at the team are working on for Quinn to improve on some stuff with DocuSign and for forums and things like that. So um, it's been cool to be able to like yeah, give suggestions to the team, and then you guys be able to like, yeah, we could do that. So that's been an awesome part of like seeing the evolution of Quinn over time. So
Yeah, I love that. Appreciate you saying that. And one of the things you mentioned was just, there's note takers out there. Those are table stakes. There's lots of them, but they just take notes. Quinn is much
mhm.
more than that. It kind of replaces 3 to 5 different technologies. Like, don't go have a bunch of subscriptions for a note taker, a scheduler, an email replier, a workflow orchestration
Mhm.
tool. Quinn's all of those things, one subscription, and you pay for ultimately how much you use the product there over time, which
Mhm.
is great.
Yeah, that was
Cur-
something I don't even know if I know you I think you helped me out with setting this up, but like I had a one of those like
One
companies
sub,
which I
yeah.
was yeah, one hub, yeah, and I was using them. And when you were like, yeah, we just got like this, you can now use Quinn for your calendar. I was like, perfect. I just saved on another subscription. So it's like Quinn just kind of paying for itself almost right there. So, um, it's pretty cool to just kind of like make it easier because it's like I don't want to have 10 different things to do what one can. So like that's just, then it actually becomes more work to use it because you're using 10 different things versus just being able to use one. So,
Exactly.
um,
Yep.
it's like, yeah.
I'm curious the time savings you've had here with Quinn thus far. If you had to quantify that per week, what would that look like if you had to guess? And then the
Hmm.
second part of that question is that time that's freed up. Is there anything you're able to do now with that bandwidth that helps to grow your business or just give you better quality of life or anything like that?
I mean, I'd have to think like, there's certain weeks like when I'm doing scheduling investment reviews for the month, like that's one of the things that like I'll go ask, have Quinn be like draft emails to these, 40 people or whatever, whoever's in my CRM for the month that, to set an investment review. And then it literally just goes through, drafts the email, has the link set up for the calendar so that way they can just schedule it right there. Um, I mean, that was something that like, I was drafting those emails and doing like a copy paste. And even before that, when I was doing like in person stuff with a lot of them, pre Zoom, like, I mean, that's a huge additional thing because I'm calling these people. So, that was, a huge event that now I don't have even just the copy paste part to it like that. When you're doing copy pasting and changing and little stuff up to add their name and little differences in the email, like that still takes a lot of time. Like that would take me prior to using Quinn when I was doing more of just a copy paste for that. That would still take me like over an hour, hour and a half at least, like, every month to be doing that and sending that out versus now it's literally like I just now have like 40 drafts in my email and I just go click send. So, it takes like all of 5 minutes. So, I would say like on a weekly basis, probably, or probably easier on a monthly basis. I'm sure it's saving me, you know, probably like 20 hours a month, I would guess, because, if I'm breaking down every week, just between the email part to it, the note taking part, that little tasks like that I could just have it like directed to do. Um, yeah, I'd say like, somewhere between like 10 to 20 hours a month. So, which again, like that's, you know, on the upper side of that, that's like half a week's work. So like just avoiding like wasted time with stuff that, um, like you could have an administrative assistant do that, but like why? Like they're going to do it a whole lot slower and less efficient. So, and if you had it, like if it's somebody, like if I had an assistant already, I would probably, I mean, I would for sure use it, but we would change what they're doing because now they're going to have way less work to do. So like now we have to, kind of like, change maybe like somebody, it just gives more opportunity to free up somebody's time that typically would have been dealing with those tasks. So,
Yep.
and utilizing those man hours in different ways. So,
Yeah, that's a good call out there. I mean, Quinn is an assistant not just for an advisor, but for a relationship assistant, executive assistant, paraplanner. Anything that's on
mhm.
their plate that would be admin work, Quinn could take that off their plate for pennies per hour, so they can focus their time on more revenue generating strategic things that require a human to be involved with. So I love that. As we kind of wrap up here, Dan, I'm more for kind of our community that's listening here today. If someone in your network or listening to this right now asked you about Quinn, how would you kind of describe it to them and the value?
I mean, I would just describe it as basically like a piece of technology that's like an administrative assistant. So, it's basically a replacement for me of an administrative assistant to save on time and, make your business more efficient. That, like the things like what we talked about with like the email and the note taking, like, I'm sure that there's going to be more evolutions to it, that we're going to be able to implement even more things. So that's, one of the exciting things that I have just from like where Quinn started to then where it's evolving to. But yeah, I think that there's a lot of potential for it, even still as kind of like improving on processes and systems. So then there even being like things where like aspects that I haven't even, they weren't even saying, like, they weren't real pain points until I realized, like, oh, that is kind of annoying to do that. Like copy and pasting an email 40 times. I didn't love doing it, but is it like the end of the world? Like I'm not now breaking rocks on like the side of the street, but like, at the same time, I don't want to sit around and copy and paste emails for an hour. So like stuff like that, where it's just like, it just makes your business more efficient is how I would describe that to another advisor. Um, that, that's looking into that and, that is even comparing other, you know, types of like assistance and note taking and things like that out there. I mean, it's just a more holistic uh, approach to it versus a lot of the ones that are just focused on just one area. So, and I think it does a great job at all the areas because like the note taking part has been great. I don't, obviously I don't use another note taker, but I'm like, I don't see how it would improve on it because it's given all the details and more of what I would need. So, I think that it's kind of top tier in each of the categories that it's in, even like, the calendar aspect where it's just syncing everything together, um, where it's all on one ecosystem versus having one hub be the calendar thing and, having Quinn being like the note taker and all this, like having more of it kind of in the one, within one ecosystem just makes more sense because it's all talking to each other. So even with just sending out reminders, like, the reminder, it's funny, like getting a reminder for this call that we hopped on,
Yep.
like stuff like that, where it's like, I know like I saw that pop up. I don't know if it was a text or if it was, I think it was a text actually that I got. And I know there was an email reminder too, where I was like, what a cool thing to be like on like, kind of almost like the client side of the thing, getting that. I was like, yeah, that just makes your life easier where you don't have people just forgetting about a meeting because they're getting the reminder for it. Um, and again, as the advisor, you're not having to deal with, sending that sort of stuff out. So it's just little things like that that are making life better as an advisor. So
Anything you wish you knew when you started?
started using Quinn, you mean?
Yeah, is there anything you wish you'd
Um,
known when you started using Quinn?
I think just kind of maybe thinking through more of the use cases of how I could use it, because that's probably one of the things where, because you don't know that you're like, oh, this is a great way to use this. This is, saving me time because, like the email thing, like, we've talked a bunch and you're like, yeah, have you tried this? I was like, no, I haven't. I think I should, like the email follow up, where it's like, yeah, that would be a good idea. Um, so I think just like thinking through the things that either you're not doing that you should be doing, like in my case, sending out those follow-up emails, but then thinking about like what are the things you're already doing that uh, that you can improve on and make more efficient. Like those were the things. Like that was the stuff that I was kind of focused on, but I even certain things where like the note taking, I'm like, yeah, I don't know. That'll save me a little bit of time, but then I'm like, oh, this is great. Like, and now I can actually focus on the conversation with the person because it wasn't like it was the end of the world. And I'm like, hey, just taking some notes over here. Don't mind if I'm looking off to this side as we're talking over here. Like, that's not the end of the world. Like, did I lose a client over it? Probably not. But like, am I creating the same type of bonding and rapport that I am now that I'm fully focused on the conversation and not having these awkward pauses just because I'm taking notes? Like, it just it's just better. So um That's probably the easiest way I could describe that.
Yeah, yeah. Knowing the process, or as we say, kind of jobs to be done in software that you can then deploy your assistant to go do is always step one. And that's why we've
Hmm.
invested so much in kind of our a library of workflows that are just clickable, that are just really just ideas for you to go through and say, oh, that'd be nice. Birthday emails, or Medicare
Right.
communications when folks are approaching 65, or RMD distribution communications. Quinn's looking at the data, drafting this communication, personalizing it, and just letting you know
Hmm.
to come check it and send it out to make sure it doesn't
Hmm.
fall through the cracks. But a lot of advisors
I think
won't
the one that we
fit. Yeah.
the one we had talked about when you were bringing up like those dates was like, and for all advisors that are in this community or watching this or listening to it, is like the in-service distribution rule of 59 and a half, when a lot of advisors that can't manage a 401k because client's been working there for 15, 20 years. It's the biggest chunk of investments that they have, but it's locked up in the 401k because they're not leaving there until they're in their 60s or so. But at 59 and a half, they can do that in-service distribution rollover and move it into an IRA. Like making little like reminders like that. Like you're probably talking to a client about that in an investment review, but like just in case it slips through the crack, at least then that way it's like another reminder where, you know, Betty Sue you're talking to, you get a reminder that she just turned 59 and a half, and you should probably reach out and, see if you can roll over that, uh, that 401k to improve on the investment returns of it. So, um, those like things like that, definitely are ways that you can use Quinn from like a sales side of things. So,
Yep. Quinn's
um,
watching it, looking at the
you know,
birthday, checking that
mhm,
every week, and then not only letting you know, but then drafting that communication for you so you can just hit
mhm,
send to that person and then drive new
mhm,
AUM. Yeah.
yeah.
Last question for you, Dan. Where do you want to see Quinn go next? You're taking advantage of a lot of the workflows here. It's saving you quite a bit of time there per month. Um, what would make it even more useful for your practice?
I think we've talked about like the DocuSign part of where, you get a new client or you have a client that, is a current client, and, where you're able to, have it basically put together the full DocuSign envelope, and then you just check it and send it out. Because obviously there's parts that, you might need to do individually. And I know we've talked about kind of like that's where it's heading a little bit, and like some of the improvements. I know we're getting to that. So, um, I think that that's like for me right now, one of those things. And especially as like I've grown and had, there's time frames where all of a sudden you just get a number of clients. You're like, man, I'm just sitting around doing DocuSign forms, which I don't hate doing, like quality problem. But like at the same time, if I don't have to do that, then that's just more hours every week that it's, instead of clicking through and copy pasting different stuff into DocuSign. If it's, Quinn's then linking with DocuSign to then just take the social, the birth date, put it all in the right places. And then I'm just going through to check to make sure that, everything's where it should be, and, hitting the send button on it. And like, that's definitely going to save time and in that way for sure, just for those, new client onboarding. So, um, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, that's
well,
definitely
we
one of
have we
them.
have great news for you then because that is available. And after this call, we're going to spend some time actually setting that up. So templates, automation,
Love
and
to hear it.
DocuSigns is something new that Quinn can do there. So excited to get
Love
that set
that.
up for you.
I thought that was the teaser we were going for. So good. Love it.
Well done.
Good.
Well, great.
Well
Well,
done.
Dan,
It's like we didn't plan that, but we could have. Yeah.
well, Dan, thanks
Yeah.
for taking time to join the call today, being a customer, giving us
Sure.
feedback here as we continue to build the right things for you and other advisory groups here around the world that use Quinn. And for those of you listening in here, thanks for your time. If you're interested in trying out Quinn, you can just head to our website, heyquinn.io. We have a 2-week free trial there, no credit card required. You can sign up there and take it for a spin.